Sailor the Piper Man here, Piper the Sailor Man. Good morning to everybody from the island of Puerto Rico. Shout out to all my friends. I'm here with my Northern Fantasia. Love Northern Pipes. I know Dave does too. And well, you light it up. I'm smoking some this aromatic peach based Cavendish. It's okay. It isn't the greatest, but I wanted something light. I didn't want anything heavy I didn't eat. Well, I want to talk about something. In 1984, I did a Med cruise. Meaning that I was in the Navy and they needed volunteers to do a Med cruise. And I was with 2nd Med Battalion at the Camp Lejeune. So for this cruise, they needed somebody qualified with vast experience. I already been a couple of Westpac cruises in Asia, but this one was going to be, I did North Atlantic, but I hadn't done a Med cruise. I was kind of excited. I asked what protocols they were going to be going to. When I found out, yeah, we were going to go to Rota, Spain, Cartagena, Barcelona, and I was really interested because of the Olympics. At that time, it was going to be in Barcelona. I was going to go to various other parts, and then finally to Haifa, Israel, and I was really, really excited. And so, as the videos go on, I'm going to talk about each port that I went to. But I want to touch on something. We had gone to the island of Corsica. Ship pulls in. First of all, I had never crossed the Atlantic Ocean, and it was a stark difference from the Pacific and South Pacific Ocean. First of all, it's like the clash of the Titans. It was rough waters, heavy swells. I didn't see a lot of birds, migratory birds, and often cloudy. The ocean was dark. I didn't see any animal life. As we crossed, I found that strange. But anyway, we got to Corsica. Corsica is the home of the French Foreign Legion. It's the birthplace of Napoleon. And depending on who you spoke, many Corsicans consider themselves Italians, other Corsicans are French. So you had complexities. But it was like going back in time. A lot of horses, a lot of men on horses. Interesting enough, at that time, you could have a gun. It was like, men on guns, men with guns, holsters. And so when we reached the port, I got off. I think I told a story where there were these elderly men, you know, in their 70s, 80s, in front. I don't know if you ever seen a picture of Marseille. It was similar to Marseille. These men were sitting open cafes, back against the walls, and since I'm very social, I didn't have a problem. So they were all sitting there, and then I turned around. When I saw them lined up like that, I turned around to see what they were looking at. They were looking at the expanse of the bay. It was like a small bay area, very beautiful, and the ship was out there. So they saw me come off the launch. I was really close, but these old men been around, old enough to have experienced World War II. So I come out and I said if it was alright for me to sit. I spoke in Spanish. I didn't want them to know I was American, even though they knew I was from American vessel. But I didn't want, for some reason, you know, I was leery about. In 1984, there was a lot of protests, anti-nuclear protests, anti-American settlement in Europe. So I didn't want them to know that I was American. So I spoke Spanish. Then began Spanish. One of them, who's Italian, he spoke Spanish. I said, "Oh, come on, sure, sit down." So I sat there. I looked at them. "How you doing?" Introduced myself. One of them pointed toward the ship and said something in French or Corsican, whatever it was. I had never heard the language. I said, he pointed to the ship, and I said, "Oh, you think I come from that ship?" I said, yeah. Then finally, I said I was American. Oh, American. Then I had a Dr. Greybull. I pull out the Greybull, and I had some Captain Black. I take the Captain Black. The man opens up his eye. Oh, American tobacco. Good American tobacco. He was mentioning Lucky Strike. Lucky Strike. He had the list down, you know, Lucky Strike, Marlboro Man. I sat there. I could smell the algae, smell the salt of the water. It had a stench, but it was like a nice, pleasant stench. When you're really close to a port, that smell reminds you of sailing. So I sat there, began talking to the man, and I asked them. We had this whole conversation about tobacco and stuff like that. So, but I'm gonna talk about something else. In a previous episode, I had talked about me talking about tobacco and exchanging tobacco. But when I want to talk about something happened during that time, I was hungry. So after we had that long dialogue, I asked them, where could I go get some food? Man goes like this. He gets up. He points. He says, Restaurante Americano. Restaurante Americano. I thought he was saying, this is an American restaurant. But what he was saying, what he meant to say was, this is a restaurant that caters American food. I said to him, no. I want Corsican food. I want Corsican food. So I knew from my previous study that area in North Africa, they have something called couscous. I had never tried it. I wanted to try it, couscous. All the sailor guys that came back saying, yeah, man, when you go, man, try couscous, you know? And try this drink, the ouzo, I think it's called. The Greeks call it ouzo. You got to try ouzo, man. It's going to, you know, and a lot of sailors hang out in the red light district. So I went to the restaurant and I stood there. Man invited me to the table, just like in the U.S. Got a waiting area, and you get to go. So I went. Thank you, sat down, and when I looked, the menu was in half French, half Italian. I knew some French words, and I understood, pretty much I understood Italian as a Romance language, like Spanish. Plus, what helped me is I had 2 years of Latin. High school, I studied Latin. Sat there, and I saw couscous. I told him I want that was couscous with some shrimps. And I told him I want vino, local table wine. It's a very, very different table wine from, you know, vintage wine and other lucrative wines. Cellular wine, table wine is regular table wine. They take it, they crush it, whatever. It might be 3 months old or whatever. You're gonna drink it daily, and let me tell you, I'm not a wine connoisseur, but I drank a lot of wine during in my life. That was some of the sweetest. It was a German wine. I won't say the name. It was from the skin of the grape. It was light, yellowish, and it was great tasting. So I had couscous, a little bit of meat, chicken really. And I ate there, and everything went well. You know, everything went well. They watched me, I gave them a nice tip. So I had a wonderful time. Then I went to the French Foreign Legion museum. The reason I went to the French Foreign Legion because my uncle talked a lot about the French Foreign Legion in this North African campaign. How they were still fighting in Algeria and Tunisia. France had a lot of colonies. You know, a lot of people don't know. These young kids don't know anything about it. They don't study that. And so there was a lot of Americans that joined the French Foreign Legion. I just wanted to see. So I went to the museum, really nice castle. And there were some things about the French Foreign Legion. Why would men fight for a foreign nation? Almost like mercenaries. And when I went, so the ones that were decorated, I can say about 1/3 of those men have been sentenced to death, capital punishment. Somehow they either escaped or what have you, and found themselves joining under the protection of the French government. There's no extradition treaty. So if you commit a crime, like I don't know if you remember Roman Polanski, who raped this young girl in California and fled to France. And since then, they haven't been able to extradite him. He lived most of his life in France. They don't have extradition treaty. So even today, they say I go out and commit a crime, and I go and live in France, and lo and behold, the authorities want me, they can't have me. They'd probably arrest me, keep me there, investigate everything. By then, 3 or 4 years. The court system is very, very slow in France. And see, I went to this museum, it was very nice. I noticed women were very quiet. They didn't talk to foreigners. I didn't see no prostitutes. What I did just was very old-fashioned. A lot of fishermen. The guy, just one thing was the guy asked me, "You sailor? You sailor?" I said, "Yeah." He didn't know what I was. He hands me this rope and wants me to do certain knots. So he does the knots, and he gives the name. So I didn't know the names of the knots. It's been years. But I was a second class scout. And as a scout, I promised to do my best to do my duty to God and my country, to obey the scout law, to keep myself physically, morally straight, morale straight, whatever. I used to know it. Well, anyway, we learned to make all these knots. The names I had forgotten. So when he did one, I said, "Oh yeah, I know how to do that," and he saw me do it. He wanted to find out if I was a real sailor. Because if you say you're a sailor and you don't know how to do a knot, they're not going to consider you a sailor. So as he was making the knots, boatswain's main knot, they had all kind of knots, whaler's knot, they had all kind of different, I was doing them. I might have been doing like 7, 8 different knots. Some I hadn't done them since, but as I did that, he took a liking to me. He's like, "Oh, you are a sailor. Yeah, you're a real sailor. You know all these knots." Like, well, yeah. And he was telling me how his parents were from the Azores. He said these islands off the coast of Portugal, really, really interesting looking islands. Like Leeward Islands, very windy, but they were known to be whalers, huge whales. And you crossing the Atlantic, you don't see much, but when you start getting close to off the western coast of Spain, starts to see whales, killer whales. You start to see mammals off the north coast of Africa, Morocco, Tunisia. Beautiful schools of dolphins, hundreds of them. And I would think, man, that water must be polluted. Mediterranean water is so old, right? But no, it's beautiful. Northern coast is very beautiful, I guess water coming in, water coming up, cleans out. It's very, so this man was from the Azores, and he was telling me some whale stories. Fishermen, how they got to the island, and how they made a living. And you telling me about World War II. I was asking about World War II, what happened and falling under British occupation. And so many islands. I went to the island of Sardinia. Sardinia was the weirdest looking island. We had done some maneuvers with the French, and we had done an amphibious assault. So they stuck me with the Spanish because I spoke Spanish as a medic, and we were the first ones to land, man. When I got off that amphibious boat, I practically went under about 10 feet. I was heavy at the time. It was a lot of heavy gear, but my flak jacket was buoyant. So man, when I jumped off that, I went straight down. Luckily, a staff sergeant grabbed me from the back and pulled me back up to the surface. and I had to swim. I didn't have a rifle. At that time they were issuing 9 millimeters. I had Beretta. I still had a sidearm, another sidearm, and luckily I had IVs on me. I always took IVs with my pants everywhere with IV, dextrose, morphine, the whole works. We landed on the island, man. The beach was rocky. But we went up the slope. I could have sworn I was in the moon or some other planet. It was green, these heavy bushel. And this is, I could see like a castle. So we got up there, we set up camp, and we had nothing to do but wait for the other units to come. They were going to do mostly exercise. I was just setting on my BDS station, battle dressing station. And I was sitting there, and we began to trade with the French, and they wanted some of the things I had, and I had such a good time. And then finally, I got called in to interpret for some NATO commanders. So I went into the office, the generals are sitting there, and the man looks at me. He's Spanish, very light skinned, blondish, almost Scandinavian looking. He looks at me, and all of a sudden, he starts talking to the other guy. I salute, the whole works. I'm standing at a parade rest. He says he's going to interpret. And I asked him in Spanish, sí, señor, yo soy el que voy a hablar para ustedes. He was like, oh, you speak English and you speak Spanish? He goes, yes. You know, my ancestors. We got this whole good conversation, and he asked me to sit down. He poured me some wine. He told his officers and NCOs to leave. We just talked about, like, he was so, I guess he never met somebody with dark skin, you know, and he was talking about how he wanted to know what was it like being in the military. I guess he found me intelligent, happy-go-lucky. I was experiencing all these new things. He invited me. We had something that looked like a Jeep. It wasn't an American Jeep. He took me to see everything. He says, we constantly do maneuvers here. NATO uses this side. Let me show you the other side. Well, I told him, I find this island so strange. It would rain. Then all of a sudden, this wind would pick up, gust of 40 miles an hour. Then it would be sunny. It was constant. In the Mediterranean, the weather patterns constantly change. The oceans change. One minute it'd be great, next minute it'd be like a freaking storm. And you can see, because I took geology in school too, and I took archaeology. You can see how at one time that island was part of either North Africa or Europe. Something happened way long ago that allowed the two continents, Europe and Africa, were together. Something happened that allowed water to drain into the Mediterranean. So for sure, he was telling me the whole Mediterranean underneath it, cities and cities and cities and cities long ago lost. And he was saying the island of Atlantis is very close here. And I was so into Atlantis, studying Atlantis. He was telling me some stories about Atlantis and how people were at one time united. All this time he's smoking pipe, I was smoking pipe. And not much conversation. You see another pipe smoking, he takes pipe, you take your pipe out, you're smoking. Europeans are not big on, like what kind of pipe, or you smoke Vulcan, acrylic Pipe smoker's a pipe smoker. You got your pipe, I got my pipe. But now the talk of tobacco, that's the talk. The one thing about Europeans, they talk more about not the making of the pipes, but they talk more about tobacco. Their interest lies more, like most tobacconists, the knowledge of tobacco. And they talk a lot about the process of making tobacco. They're very interested in Black Cavendish, how it's made in Kentucky, Kentucky Fire Burley. Very interested in that. It was so interesting. They had a lot of Turkish tobacco, a lot of Oriental tobacco. You're very interested in American tobacco. So I'm gonna leave it there. I'm gonna build up. I had a very good time on the island of Sardinia Island of Corsica. I went to the island of Mallorca. Then I went to the island of Sicily. Da, 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 da. And I ended up going to Palermo. And that was very interesting. I think part of The Godfather 3 was shot there. Or 2. This other picture I saw, the Sicilian was shot there. Saw that picture long ago. And it was very, very old world. Vineyard, grapes and vines, and you can imagine. I can imagine for thousands of years the different empires that overran that island. Yet the local people, they still had indigenous people. The Sicilians tough. They got these old ways, you know. The village, they have different villages, but all these villages are tribal people. They come from tribes long ago, lost to history. The food and the wine were excellent. Well, you say to the pipe man, pipe the sailor man. Might as well call this random thoughts, right? Guys, have a good one.